So, Tom, do you also feel like in this last week that Zapier, N8N, and Make were killed by OpenAI?
Not entirely, no.
Yeah, no, me neither.
I wouldn't say killed. But that was an interesting headline. It did catch my eye to say that Zapier and OpenAI are battling in some way, but I think it was more of a...
But also bedfellows?
Yeah.
So shall we recap first? Shall we explain what the hell we're talking about?
We got to unpack that.
Okay.
Because the Zapier killer, the 800-pound gorilla in the automation space, is not going to evaporate overnight.
Yeah, the AI hype bros were out in full force this week. But very long story short, it was cool to see OpenAI's Dev Day. One sidebar thing that stood out to me is they gave out awards for, the companies that are using the most tokens and using essentially as a proxy for the super users of OpenAI's APIs. And we are now at some companies in the trillions of tokens realm. Like that's wild to see. So OpenAI's Dev Day covered a lot of, I think, really interesting developer advances and things that developers will be able to use both on the product side and integrate it with their own, AI features, and also on the actual coding side as developers. OpenAI's Codex is quickly becoming a front runner in terms of like actually building software.
It's their turn, right?
Yeah, this week is their turn. We'll see someone else outpace them in a few weeks. But what stood out the most to a lot of people, and where all the AI hype bros came into play, was they announced what they're calling Agent Builder, which is on its face akin to a Zapier, N8N, Make style visual whiteboard where you lay out different workflow steps and you trigger different automations happening. Obviously with OpenAI, it's not just workflow automation, it's meant to do a lot of AI functionality. And so the agentic part of it has, baseline is it's using MCP to pull in, different tool calls and functions and utilities. But I will just jump right into my thoughts. This is nowhere even remotely close to being the killer of Zapier, N8N, Make, Lindi, etc. The list goes on. Because this is, the UX is terrible. And it looks like they grabbed some boilerplate HTML, CSS framework and spent about a day and a half on it. And then the actual functionality is quite limited. There's, your classic if-else statements and the ability to create triggers from various places. But the actual functionality, what it can automate, is nowhere near the others because they don't have the integrations out of the box. What's interesting is they are trying to use MCP as the way to frame, you could have integrations with every product out there. If it's got an API, then you can use MCP. But I don't know about you, MCP is slow and unreliable if you're using it for, shall we say, multiplayer use cases that businesses operate around. A lot of, people spinning up a Lindi or a Zapier account are building an automation that looks at just their inbox and just their prompt to scan it in the way that they want to with just their calendar and just their Slack, whatever it might be that they want to do. It's kind of these single player use cases. And that's what Agent Builder can help with. But businesses don't work that way. They're multiplayer. They have, a dozen people across 3 different departments using 4 different tools, and all of that data needs to talk to each other throughout the processes that they're operating. And this tool is nowhere near being able to integrate to that level, especially with MCP being as slow as it is.
And as central as it is to this, right? It's the front feature. It's not a sort of backseat component. I think there's a couple layers to this. One is, hold on, OpenAI just embraced Anthropic's MCP protocol, right? Like the open protocol. Like that's a pretty big deal on its own. Mm-hmm. The fact that now, multiple of these frontier models are supporting MCP in a first party way.
Yeah.
So I think that's generally really good for the industry. But to your point, yeah, it's about a dozen features of this agent builder that all are specific to agents. And there's no way to recreate the I'd say flexibility and dexterity and precision that you get with a Make, N8N, Zapier, like a true automation provider. You just don't have that level of precision with moving data from one place to another place, right? It doesn't need things that don't need, an agentic component cannot be done in this agent builder, which is fine, right? They're not trying to do that. It's really kind of carving out a new space, I think, for what OpenAI is trying to do. It's like just the agent component. What's that?
How so? As a new space?
Well, just like, it's not trying to replace Zapier or Make or N8N. It's saying like, hey, instead of doing an API call inside of your Make N8N or whatever, like, use this agent builder and have a little bit more dexterity for how this agent is, doing a series of tasks. I can imagine it being really useful for new apps that are trying to like just create an agent that does a thing inside of like, a SaaS experience. I can see how that is more oriented, but this whole agent builder is much more geared towards developers than it is like a consumer grade, chat. Like ChatGPT is just consumer grade. Anybody can have a conversation with a chatbot. But the agent builder is much more like, hey, don't forget your developer keys and add credit to, your API and be able to, set limits and understand tokens, like all these things that you need to do inside of an agent builder. It's just a developer. It's another tool in the developer's toolkit to be able to deploy, an OpenAI, grounded application that can do a bunch of things. But, very quietly also on the back end, if you need Zapier, right, you can plug Zapier in really specifically inside it. Yeah, through MCP, right? So all the 8,500 applications that you've been using on Zapier or that you need a connection to on Zapier, you can just, pop that right in and it can still work, I guess.
Well, and that's where I'm just like pretty let down by it, because I tried it myself even using MCP through Zapier directly. It's slow, and this was even more brutal because you are making the tool call. You're not even making the tool call. You're making the MCP call from OpenAI's agent builder to Zapier's MCP, and Zapier is then making the call to the tool that you connected to, and then it's doing all the work, and then coming back through those layers, and it just felt so slow, and like I could have done this faster myself.
Really? You could have opened up Google Drive, created a new folder, right?
No, I'm being okay, Tom. I'm being hyperbolic, but point stands of like,
hey,
it is not consumer based at all, as in not B2C type consumer, but as in someone who is familiar with Zapier N8N cannot just jump into this and expect A, the same level of features, B, the same level of customization, and C, the thing that really stands out to me, which is why I think, if we're thinking about short-term, long-term, right now we're critiquing all of the immediate kind of usefulness of this. Long-term, what stands out to me that I think is why I wouldn't recommend this route to folks to use their tool is, by nature of it, it locks you into OpenAI's models to be used in these frameworks. And that's really part of the benefit of, N8N is a good example where it literally is 3 clicks and 2 minutes to have an entire agentic workflow. And in the middle of that workflow might be the AI agent itself. And that AI agent is using OpenAI, but, Gemini releases a great new model and you want to have this agentic workflow use OpenAI or Google's Gemini model instead. 3 clicks and 2 minutes later, you've swapped it out. Whereas OpenAI is never going to give you that option because they want using their model in their agent builder. And so long-term, that's the other thing that stands out to me of like, okay, cool, but why would I want to lock myself into an ecosystem in a technology stack that is so early? And as we see and joked about a few minutes ago, like every other week, someone's outpacing the next, latest, greatest model or innovation or utility built into the tools at the LLM level. And so I think it's interesting, but it's not a game changer at all.
Is there any use case or situation that you can envision it actually being a perfect fit for?
No. Like they're
roasted.
Like everything in technology, there's rarely ever one specific perfect answer. So that's probably the answer to most tools. Yeah. But, given your average business operations workflow, if you had Agent Builder and 5 other similar tools laying in front of you and you had to pick one, I can't imagine a world that OpenAI's Agent Builder in its current incarnation is ever going to be a top choice, let alone top 3.
Do you think it's a first version that was shipped early to get feedback and it will be significantly improved? And this is just like, hey, you know, we're ripping off the Band-Aid on something we've been working on? Or is it kind of a, you know, core piece or secondary piece that...
Yeah, I would say this is an MVP, which is why I can't knock it too hard, because I think that's why it was presented at Developer Day. Like if you read between the lines, the group that they presented it to, the way they presented it, it's meant to be, you know, here's our first stab at this and we're going to evolve it and improve it over time.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think it goes back to OpenAI is trying to bear hug every single industry or type of tool that they could. And this is why you see, you know, they've got investments this week with NVIDIA, but also AMD and Intel, and they're all over the place. And so I think they're just trying things, which you got to respect, because in a new space like this where everyone's figuring it out, you got to just try things, and sharing what you're trying out publicly, like this agent builder, I think is not a bad thing. But by and large, this is very much an MVP. I will say the one thing it does introduce that I really like, that I hope others take their lead on, that does stand out to me as the best part of it from a development point of view, is the guardrail system and the evals. So a lot of the other tools are really just kind of, you as a human have to try out a prompt and try out a setup and then test it and look at what the output looks like and kind of work backwards from there to say, how are we going to improve this? Whereas the evals can be done directly in Agent Builder for testing the outputs and giving it, you know, ground rules and running it at scale is kind of UAT version of testing AI prompts. And then the guardrails too. So, you know, giving it specific, it's kind of a if this then that on steroids to a degree. The guardrail system does help a ton with catching hallucinations or catching things being wrong before it lets it pass it on to the next step in the agentic workflow. So I do hope that others learn from that, because I do think that is woefully missing from all the other, call it, agent builders.
Yeah, it seems like a relatively obvious next step in the evolution of these things is to have those guardrails and evals. I think the evals component in particular is really difficult for an individual builder to do and execute, like across models, right? So we saw this a lot when ChatGPT 5 came out, or just you saw the quality drop, people shifted to another model, the other model had a ton more users, and then they allegedly dropped the quality on these other models because they had a surge in users. And like, how do you maintain or evaluate the quality of models across, you know, over time when you have certain prompts that are like key to a workflow? That's just a hyper niche problem for a handful of people right now, but it can obviously grow quite a bit in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and one tool that I've actually seen build both a good agent builder and really good evals into the tool is Retool. And they launched some pretty cool new features this week. But before I share those, have you had a chance to use Retool much?
I used it a while ago. I haven't used it in 2025, but I've only heard really great things about it. So I am curious to learn more about it. Tell me about it.
It is really great, especially this year with the amount of, you can tell that they've got a really good product team that is thinking about like, what do people build with our tool and what tools do we need to give them inside of it to build better, essentially. And so they've put a lot of work into essentially the agent builder inside of their system, because, you know, it functions much like people might think an Airtable does, in that you've got your backend data that you can build out and customize the way that all functions. And then you can build interfaces on top of that. What they've added a lot of this year is workflow automation builders directly in the tool. So just like other tools, you can, you know, plug in and then enter a maker Zapier to it to get automation out of it. But they've built it directly into their tool. And so that was kind of step one. And now they built AI agent systems that you can build within these workflows, which is great. But whenever you're building the AI agent part, they've got an entire functionality around evals. And so as you're building your agentic workflows in the tool where you're already building the backend data and the interfaces itself, it's really nice to have it all in one place, because the evals are really based on, what data are you putting through this agent, and then it's evaluating it. So I would say that they're doing a really good job of kind of building in evals and the tools that like you need from a technical perspective to build agentic workflows really well at scale for businesses, not just I built an agent that tells me every morning what's on my calendar today. Like that's kind of that single player use case. But with a tool like Retool, you're building for, an entire company to be using the interfaces and automations that you're building. So that part I'm impressed by. But the cool thing that they announced this week was they essentially have built their own vibe coding platform into Retool as well.
All right.
Which stands out as really interesting to me because tools like Lovable, Replit, Bolt, like those kinds of tools, they treat every prompt that you give it as we're starting from scratch. We're going to build out the back end, the front end, functionality, all that fun stuff. Whereas Retool, they've taken the same approach where, it's chat box and you can describe what you want, but you're doing it in a system that already has a predefined set of like the UI kit and the elements that you can put on an interface. It already has its way of building your backend data structure. So the vibe coding is much, I think at least, going to be much more effective because it already has the guardrails. Whereas I find, even myself, a lot of what goes wrong with Replit and Lovable is, well, you just gave it a prompt and it had to figure out the entire backend tech stack for data architecture and what lives where and all that fun stuff. And then it built the front end on top of that. And of course there's errors. Whereas with something like Retool, you've got guardrails on both those systems already, and you probably built to a degree at least your backend data, if not already some interfaces. And so when you're asking it to do stuff, it's doing it within those. I keep using the word guardrails, but confines is probably better. So it's kind of like I read an interview. I think it was one of my favorite bands, Nine Inch Nails. But I remember an interview with Trent Reznor, the lead of that, talking about like how some of his best albums has been when he has pre-written his requirements for the album of, I want the narrative to be this, I will only let myself use these instruments, not these instruments, etc.
Yeah.
And he's always said that creates a better album than when he just goes into a studio and starts going, let's pick up a guitar and see what comes of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference here too, of like, having those requirements heading into it for a vibe coding tool makes the output that much better versus it's a blank slate, just figure it out.
There is a lot of freedom and restriction, right? In putting the bounds of the box, you can really just focus on what's on the inside. I think, from the way that you described it, Airtable is doing quite a bit of that through their Omni builder, which has gotten a lot better since it started. Still limited in a couple different ways, but you can still, have it build a table in the back end or build a series of interfaces for you, or, start something from scratch that can get you really far, especially when you're just like trying to prototype something out to say like, hey, a system could do this, right? And then take the time and refine and rebuild certain components of it to actually make it operational, right? But if you're just trying to demonstrate, hey, I can see how many tickets or see how many things, like Omni is pretty good at going from 0 to 1, and then 1 to production is a different challenge. It sounds like Retool is like a lot closer on the 1 to production leap, which maybe I'll check it out. That's actually a pretty interesting thing. It's been in the discussion for a long time, right? With Replit and the vibe coding tools alone, I think, have their own type of user. Right. It's not going to be, I think, a lot of the users that, at least us, for the most part, maybe get a lovable front end for a quick prototype and, paste that into something else. But it's not going to be something that runs an organization.
Not anytime soon.
Today, at least.
Yeah, we built a couple internal tools with Replit, and they work good for certain use cases. But most of the success I've had was single player use cases. Like last week, we have all these PDFs that we get from clients, so we don't want to use just some random PDF to Markdown converter, because we try to convert everything into Markdown so we can use it amongst all of our own data as we're doing work. But I needed something I could deploy locally that wasn't going to, have all this client data elsewhere on the internet. And so I went to Lovable and said, I need a local application with the ability to drop into PDF and convert it to Markdown and ensure that you're scanning images and summarizing those images into Markdown when you can't convert that.
Boom.
And 20 minutes later, I had it. and deployed it on my Mac, and it works great. But single player use case. Whereas, that's why I'm excited to see what Airtable and Retool are both doing, because I think that's where people are building, business tools and software for teams. And if you can accelerate that for them, everyone wins.
Well, it has been a busy week, Justin. I think I got to get back to work. What about you?
Yeah, it is Thanksgiving here in Canada this weekend. We're a month ahead of you as our pals in America. So I am going to go finish up work and then actually take a long weekend. So chat later.
Enjoy that. Talk to you later.
Bye.